OIG Audits of Federal Student Aid Programs and Operations. Featuring Jeffrey Necras, Director, OIG Student Financial Assistance Advisory and Assistance Team, Kristen Reinhardt, Auditor, OIG Student Financial Assistance Advisory and Assistance Team, and Jack Sauer, Auditor, OIG State and Local Advisory and Assistance Team.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Necras, and joining me today are Kristen Reinhardt and Jack Sauer. We are from the Office of Inspector General, Audit Services. Today we'll discuss the OIG's audits and reviews of the federal student aid programs and higher education grant programs. This session will cover an overview of OIG's audit services. We'll highlight some of the management challenges facing the department, go over our annual work plan and ongoing and planned engagements. We'll highlight some of our reviews of FSA's operations. We'll go over some reviews of schools administration of the Title IV programs. And lastly, we'll cover some of our reviews of the department and schools administration of the HEERF and emergency assistance programs. Some of you are wondering what an Inspector General does. In 1978, Congress passed the Inspector General Act, creating the Inspector General structure we have today. Inspector Generals focus on promoting the economy, effectiveness, and efficiency of an agency's operations and preventing and detecting fraud, waste, and abuse. This is primarily accomplished through the performance of audit and investigative activities. Inspector Generals report to both the agency head and to Congress. There are 74 Inspector Generals throughout the federal government. The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Inspector General was established by statute in 1979. I'll now give an overview of the Office of Inspector General and Audit Services. The Office of Inspector General has the authority to inquire about all program and administrative activities of the department, including activities of parties working under contracts, grants, or other arrangements with the department. While most of you today are familiar with the Title IV programs, the department's programs and operations support elementary and secondary education, post-secondary education, vocational education, and more. There are more than 100 grant programs that annually provide over $76 billion to serve 55 million elementary and secondary education students attending public and private schools throughout the country. In administering the Title IV programs, FSA processes about 17 million applications, disperses about $112 billion in aid for more than 9 million students attending more than 5,500 post-secondary schools. In addition, FSA oversees a student loan portfolio of more than $1.6 trillion, representing more than 45 million borrowers. The mission of the Office of Inspector General is to promote the efficiency, effectiveness, and integrity of the department's programs and operations through independent and objective audits, investigations, and inspections. Sandra Bruce has led the Office of Inspector General since 2018 and was confirmed as Inspector General in 2021. Major components of the Office of Inspector General include audit services, investigation services, and technology services. Our annual budget is about $67 million, and we have offices located across the country. Our staff is composed of criminal investigators, auditors, attorneys, analysts, and other professionals. We have 220 employees, with 85 assigned to audit services. Audit services conducts internal and external audits, inspections, and reviews aimed at improving the department's programs and operations. Components of audit services include regional and DC-based teams responsible for conducting audits and inspections, providing guidance to auditors in the conduct of non-federal audits, and overseeing the department and FSA's annual financial statement audits. You can learn more about the Office of Inspector General's non-federal audit team and investigation services in other sessions of this conference, and more about the work of the Inspector General by visiting our website, oig.gov. fsa.ed.gov. Under statute, the Office of Inspector General reports annually on management challenges facing the department. Current management challenges related to federal student aid and the Title IV programs include implementing the pandemic relief. Implementing pandemic relief poses challenges for the department to effectively oversee new grant programs and additional funding, implement additional student financial assistance program requirements, and ensure that quality data are reported. The department was provided more than $280 billion under pandemic relief laws, including $76 billion allocated to post-secondary schools under the HEERF programs. In addition, with the end of the pandemic, the department must now transition borrowers back into repayment. The department must also provide effective oversight of the Title IV programs to ensure that the programs are not subject to fraud, waste, and abuse. The department's responsibilities include coordinating and monitoring the activity of many entities, such as schools, servicers, accreditation agencies, guarantee agencies, and lenders. In addition, the department, its grantees, and subrecipients must have effective controls to ensure that reported data are accurate and complete. The department relies on data to evaluate program performance and inform management decisions. For the last several years, audits have identified information technology security controls that need improvement to adequately protect the department's systems and data. In general, this challenge falls under the purview of the Office of Inspector General's Technology Services, which oversees annual FSMA assessments. And lastly, improper payments. The department must comply with the Payment Integrity Information Act and develop reliable estimates of improper payments, including estimates for the direct loan and Pell programs. The OIG produces an annual work plan of our planned initiatives and engagements that will assist the department in fulfilling its responsibilities to taxpayers and students. Our annual work plan is based on an assessment of the risk to the department's programs and operations, input received from department management, Congress, and the Office of Management and Budget, the identified management challenges. While we are limited in the number of engagements we can perform, we are open to suggestions for future work plan ideas. If you have any suggestions, please reach out to us using the contact information provided at the end of this session. I'll now go over some of our ongoing projects. We're assessing FSA's plans for transitioning assigned activities to its business process operations vendors and the status of the transition. We're also evaluating FSA's implementation of the Future Act and the FAFSA Simplification Act's provisions pertaining to federal taxpayer information through the SABRE initiative. We're assessing FSA's establishment and monitoring of performance measures and indicators for returning borrowers to repayment. And we're evaluating FSA's oversight of its contractors' acceptability review process for annual proprietary school audits and whether those audits meet applicable reporting requirements. We have also initiated a series of audits in response to changes in 2014 to the Higher Education Act, which allow a student who does not have a high school diploma to be eligible for Title IV assistance if they are enrolled in an eligible career pathway program. We are finishing audits of 3 schools. We assessed whether the school's Career Pathways program met the Higher Education Act's program eligibility requirements for such a program, whether students enrolled in the school's Career Pathway program met the student eligibility requirements for enrollment in such a program, and whether schools excluded from enrollment statuses and cost of attendance the high school completion component of the Career Pathway program. Some of the projects we've proposed to look at in fiscal year 2024 include assessing FSA's oversight of schools reporting of foreign gifts and contracts under Section 117 of the Higher Education Act, evaluating the department's processes for assessing and recouping liabilities from colleges that closed, assessing FSA's plans for transitioning student loan servicing to its United Servicing and Data Solution vendors and the status of the transaction, and lastly, evaluating the department's compliance with the Payment Integrity Information Act, including assessing the direct loan and Pell programs and proper payment estimates. We've performed several reviews of FSA's implementation of the CARES Act. We evaluated the results of FSA's processes for suspending involuntary collections and refunding payments collected on defaulted department-held loans in response to the pandemic. We found that FSA achieved generally positive results with over 96% of involuntary collections suspended and 99% of amounts collected refunded for the period we reviewed. However, we did identify some weaknesses. Our recommendations included that FSA determine appropriate actions to take regarding employers that continued to improperly withhold wages from borrowers, and develop and implement procedures to track the Department of Justice's progress on suspending and refunding involuntary collections on department-held loans. Our report was issued in June of 2021. We assessed whether FSA had adequate processes for waiving the requirement that Title IV funds be returned, canceling borrowers' obligation to repay direct loans, and excluding Pell Grant disbursements from Pell lifetime usage for students who withdrew because of the pandemic. And we assessed whether FSA had adequate processes for schools to report the number and amounts of waivers applied. We found that FSA had adequate processes over these requirements. Our report was issued in May of 2023. In addition, we evaluated FSA's processes to ensure TEACH grantees received full-time credit toward their service obligations for part-time and temporarily interrupted service due to the pandemic. We found weaknesses in FSA's processes to ensure TEACH grantees received full-time credit towards their service obligations. For example, FSA established a process that relied solely on whether a recipient's employment end date fell within a specified period to determine applicability of the CARES Act flexibilities. And the processes apply only to the 2019-2020 academic year. We identified other weaknesses as well. We made a number of recommendations for FSA to improve its processes, and our report was issued in January of 2022. I'd like to highlight some of our reviews of the department and FSA's administration of the Title IV programs. We assessed whether FSA consistently administered the heightened cash monitoring payment methods, and we assessed whether FSA's use of HCM was an effective oversight tool. Our audit covered FSA's oversight from 2014 through 2016. We found that FSA consistently administered its HCM payment methods for schools that FSA placed on HCM for the top 5 reasons, such as negative accreditation actions, later missing financial statements, failure to meet administrative capability standards, failing composite scores, and severe program review findings. However, we found that FSA did not have adequate controls to reasonably ensure it consistently placed schools on HCM when they submitted late financial statements or had failing composite scores. Specifically, we identified a number of schools for which FSA did not cite, did not place on provisional certification and HCM, or did not perform these actions timely. Also, FSA did not have controls to track a school's payment status from the recommendation for HCM placement until the placement was actually made. Overall, we found FSA's use of HCM was an effective oversight tool. Our review found that FSA's processes provided that a school placed on HCM implemented the required corrective actions before returning to advance pay, and a school placed on HCM2 submitted the required documentation to FSA before being reimbursed. Our recommendations included that FSA develop and implement controls that ensure consistent, appropriate, and timely actions are taken when schools fail to submit financial statements or receive non-passing composite scores, and to track a school's method of payment status from the recommendation for HCM placement until the change is implemented. Our report on heightened cash monitoring was issued in February of 2020. We evaluated the department's processes for overseeing proprietary schools' compliance with the 90-10 revenue requirements and the department's processes for reporting of 90-10 revenue information to the Congress and public. We found that FSA had several processes for overseeing schools' compliance with 90-10 revenue requirements. However, we found that the department was late to report schools' 90-10 information to Congress for all 5 award years we reviewed. In addition, the department's 90-10 report to Congress for 1 year was incomplete. Finally, we found that the department did not publicly disclose the schools that failed to meet the 90-10 requirements on the College Navigator website as required by the Higher Education Act. Instead, the department identified these schools on its College Affordability and Transparency Center website. We recommended that FSA and the Office of Post-Secondary Education update and implement processes to ensure that 90-10 revenue information is reported to Congress timely each year. In addition, we recommended that OPE work with the Institute of Education Sciences and the National Center for Education Statistics to ensure schools that do not meet the 90-10 requirements are disclosed on the College Navigator website as required by the Higher Education Act. Our report was issued in August of 2023. Lastly, we evaluated the department's compliance with Experimental Sites Initiative reporting requirements. We found that the department did not comply with the Experimental Sites Initiative reporting requirements as it had not published a comprehensive Experimental Sites Initiative report since the 2010-2011 award year. There were 15 experiments that have been implemented since the issuance of the last report that had not been reported on by the department. Our recommendations included that FSA ensure that reporting on experiments is completed and submitted to Congress at least every 2 years, as required by the Higher Education Act. Our report was issued in October of 2022. Kristen will now discuss the Office of Inspector General's reviews of institutions of higher education.
In addition to performing reviews of FSA's operations, OIG also conducts reviews of institutions' administration of the Title IV programs. I will discuss some of our recent work in this area. You can see the institutions OIG reviewed and the dates we issued reports on this slide and the next. One area OIG recently reviewed is professional judgment. We issued a series of reports on whether selected schools applied, documented, and reported their use of professional judgment, including dependency override, in accordance with the Higher Education Act, or HEA. We found that 2 of the 3 schools, USC and Base Hamadrash and Mestiva of Baltimore, did not always apply professional judgment in accordance with the HEA for the students that we reviewed. We also found that all 3 schools did not always document their use of professional judgment in accordance with the HEA for the students that we reviewed. The school's improper application and documentation of professional judgment resulted in the schools awarding and dispersing more Pell funds than some of the students would have otherwise received. We recommended that FSA require each school to return any improperly awarded Title IV funds. In its final audit determinations, FSA required National Aviation Academy of Tampa Bay to pay about $1.97 million and Base Hamadrash and Mastiva of Baltimore to pay about $220,000 in liabilities. The USC audit is still going through the audit resolution process. OIG also conducted 2 audits to determine whether selected schools had controls in place to ensure that they report complete and accurate campus crime statistics under the Clery Act. We found that both schools did not have effective controls to ensure that they reported complete and accurate Clery Act crime statistics. We also found that both schools reported Clery Act crime statistics for calendar years 2015 through 2017 that were not complete and accurate. As a result, the statistics did not provide reliable information to current and prospective students, their families, and other members of the campus community for making decisions about personal safety and security. We recommended that FSA require the schools to design and implement effective internal controls over the completeness and accuracy of their Clery Act crime statistics. We also recommended that FSA determine whether it should take action against the universities for the Clery Act violations identified in our reports. FSA fined the University of Texas at San Antonio $670,000 and fined the University of North Georgia $475,000. OIG also conducted a series of audits to determine whether selected schools completed verification of applicant data in accordance with federal requirements and whether they accurately reported the results to the department in accordance with federal guidance. Verification helps ensure that students receive the appropriate amount of federal financial aid and is also an important control to prevent improper payments of federal financial aid. We found varying levels of compliance by the 6 schools we reviewed. For the statistical random samples of students we reviewed, we found that 3 of the 6 schools, USC, South Florida Institute of Technology, and University of Houston, did not always complete verification of applicant data in accordance with federal requirements. We found that 1 of the schools, Maricosta College, generally completed verification of applicant data in accordance with federal requirements, but did not complete verification after a subsequent ICER was received for 1 of the 60 students we reviewed. We also found that 2 of the 6 schools, DeVry University and College of Southern Nevada, completed verification of applicant data in accordance with federal requirements for all 60 students in our samples. We also found that 2 of the 6 schools, USC and Maricosta College, did not always accurately report verification results to FSA, and that 4 of the 6 schools, South Florida Institute of Technology, DeVry University, University of Houston, and College of Southern Nevada, did accurately report verification results to FSA. The schools agreed with our findings and described their corrective actions to address the issues identified in our reports. Additionally, in its final audit determination, FSA required USC to pay about $324,000 in liabilities. You can access all of these reports on the EdOIG website or at oversight.gov if you would like to dig into the details of what we reviewed, what we found, and what we recommended. My colleague Jack will now discuss reviews of the department's and institution's administration of the HEERF and emergency assistance programs.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Sauer, and I'll now discuss the work the OIG has conducted covering the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund Program, or HEERF, which was authorized in March of 2020 in response to the coronavirus pandemic. The department's Office of Post-Secondary Education administers more than 60 programs intended, in part, to increase access to quality post-secondary education. OPE's Emergency Response Unit is responsible for administering and overseeing the HEERF program. Our initial project covering the HEERF program was a quick response inspection covering the reporting requirements, and we issued a report in February of 2021. The objective of our inspection was to determine whether selected schools met the HEERF public reporting requirements and also to identify the reported usage of the institutional portion of HEERF funds spent. Our inspection found that 81 of the 100 schools selected complied with the HEERF reporting requirements. We found that 80 of the schools posted reports on their website by the deadline of the end of October of 2020, which was required, and one school had posted the report after the deadline. We were not able to locate the reports on the websites associated with 19 of the 100 schools. These 19 schools had drawn down over $5.5 million out of the almost $29 million awarded under the institutional portion of HEERF as of the end of the quarter, which was September 30, 2020. We made one suggestion specific to the anomalies we noted regarding the awards and recipient identifiers and suggested the department reviews the anomaly and take corrective actions as warranted. The second department-focused project we conducted was an audit of OPE's oversight of the HEERF grants. We issued that report in June of 2022. Our objective there was to determine whether OPE had adequate processes to ensure that schools used the HEERF funds appropriately and that performance goals were met. We found that OPE needed to strengthen its oversight processes, although we determined that OPE had established and implemented several controls to promote transparency and accountability. It did not perform or document several key activities that were essential to effective program oversight. Regarding the performance goals, we found that OPE established a metric related to the timeliness of its initial awards to schools. However, it did not otherwise establish any clear performance goals for the HEERF program or specific metrics that would provide a basis against which it could monitor individual schools' performance or report on outcomes at the program level. We made two recommendations that included the department develop a monitoring framework for the HEERF program that uses risk assessment process to identify and prioritize significant program risks, and also to design and implement a risk-based monitoring plan and associated key control activities. During the same period, we issued a flash report on the duplicate HEERF grant awards that we had found. The flash report presented a finding concerning duplicate HEERF awards to schools that we identified by analyzing program data in the department's grants management system. We identified schools where they received awards, the same awards twice. We identified 25 duplicate HEERF awards that OPE had made to 24 schools, totaling about $73 million, which had not been corrected or documented at the time of our review in August of 2021. The department officials stated that their processes for reviewing and approving HEERF applications and awards evolved over time and resulted in the department identifying and correcting many other duplicate HEERF awards. However, we found that the department's processes didn't always prevent or timely identify and correct the duplicate awards. According to the department's grant management system data, most of the schools did not draw down funds from the duplicate awards. However, eight schools did. We made one recommendation that the department design and implement written policies and procedures for HEERF and other future emergency programs that specifically address the application and award verification procedures designed to prevent duplicate awards from occurring, quality assurance reviews of obligated HEERF funds, including analysis to identify duplicate awards, and then also the correction and documentation of erroneous awards in a timely manner. We currently have a flash report ongoing that covers the department's HEERF audit resolution activities. The purpose of this flash report is to present information on independent audits with findings pertaining to HEERF and audit resolution activities conducted by the department. The final report should be issued in the near future. In addition to our audit work covering the department's oversight of HEERF, we also conducted audits at 3 schools covering their use of HEERF funds. The objective of these audits was to determine whether schools use HEERF funds for allowable and intended purposes. For our first HEERF school audit, we selected Lincoln College of Technology and found that Lincoln Education Services Corporation, which was the owner of the selected school, had generally used the student aid portion of its HEERF funds for allowable intended purposes, but it did not always use the institutional portion of its funds in accordance with federal requirements. We determined that it did not adequately document its eligibility determinations for a small number of the students that received emergency financial aid grants. It improperly applied institutional grant funds to credit student accounts. It had improperly charged expenditures that extended beyond the grant's performance period, and it did not follow cash management requirements. The second HEERF school audit that we conducted was of Remington College. We found that the school generally used the student aid portion of its HEERF funds for allowable and intended purposes, but did not always use the institutional portion of its funds in accordance with federal requirements. We found that Remington College spent institutional funds on several unallowable purposes and did not always follow federal procurement rules and cash management requirements. For our third HEERF school audit of the University of Cincinnati, we found that the school generally used its student aid and institutional funds for allowable intended purposes, but we found that it needed to strengthen its review and documentation processes for its use of student aid grant funds and other processes to ensure compliance with its institutional grant funds. We also found that the institution did not fully comply with cash management and reporting requirements. So the takeaways from our school audits related to HEERF were that schools should take steps to adequately document their grant activities, only charge the grants for costs incurred during the appropriate grant period, use competitive procurement processes as required, and update their policies and procedures as necessary to accommodate the updated grant requirements. Finally, cash management requirements, including the minimization of time between drawdown and disbursement of funds, and then ensuring that any excess funds maintained are in interest-bearing accounts. One of the other compliance areas that came into focus after the second coronavirus relief law was passed that provided some additional flexibility for HEERF recipients was a allowability of lost revenue to be charged to the grant. An example of this from our work was at the University of Cincinnati that had overstated the amount of lost revenue it had charged to its institutional grant due to improper revenue recognition and the inclusion of a duplicate charge. Additionally, in response to one of our findings at the Lincoln College of Technology, the school had reallocated a cost question to write off student account balances under the lost revenue flexibility. It had determined that it was aligned with the department guidance in that area. So overall, it's important that schools have policies and procedures to ensure that their calculations for charging lost revenue are reviewed for accuracy and consistency, and then also consistent with existing financial reporting approaches, as well as department guidance. In addition to our recent HEERF work, we conducted an audit of Gulf Coast State College, covering the school's use of 2019 emergency assistance to institutions of higher education program funds. We issued a report in September of 2022 on this audit. Our objective was to determine whether the school had used the program funds in accordance with federal requirements and also its approved application. We found that the Gulf Coast used about $1.8 million in program funds for activities that were not allowable under the federal requirements. Specifically, Gulf Coast had used about $1.7 million of its emergency assistance program funds for lost revenue. It was not an authorized use under the Additional Supplemental Appropriations for Disaster Relief Act of 2019. So it wasn't allowable under that law. And then we found an additional $96,000 for the purchase of equipment that was unrelated to the covered disaster. So Gulf Coast actually had identified these uses in its revised budget that it had submitted to the department and received approval. The lost revenue was not identified as something that wasn't specifically authorized. And so as a result, we made two recommendations that the department require Gulf Coast to reallocate the almost $1.8 million in question costs prior to closing out the grant, or return the question costs to the department. So that concludes our presentation. This last slide here provides some contact information of our hotline for reporting fraud, waste, and abuse and related department programs, and also a link to our new website where our reports are available. So thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate it.